Now let's talk about a different kind of situation. Some of the kids that you encounter who literally do have everything and they can dial it up, anything they want in a moment's notice, and what that's doing to their brains, to their dopamine production in this.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really sad thing that we're seeing more and more of in clinical care is kids who are coming in without any desire to grab life. They barely get themselves out of bed in the morning. They barely attend school. They don't want to do their schoolwork. They don't want to participate in any kind of organized activity. And yet these are kids who come from, loving parents, wealthy families. They have privileged education. No parenting is perfect, but these parents are certainly good enough, in the spirit of Winnicott's Good Enough Mother. It really sort of begs the question, like, what is going on here? And I think, it is, what I refer to as the plenty paradox, and the ways in which overabundance itself can actually be a human stressor. We were wired over millions of years of evolution to reflexively approach pleasure and avoid pain. We have this brain mechanism that makes every pleasure fleeting and makes us the ultimate seekers, always wanting more. We're really wired for pain. And yet we live in a world in which we're insulated from pain. This one patient of mine, I'll never forget, he said, well, if I want to have sex, I just go online to one of the dating apps and I hook up with someone and I have sex. If I want to snort cocaine, I just go online and contact my dealer and he brings over cocaine. And he just had a long list. And I just said to him, wow, I mean, how is that working for you? And he just paused. He said, not very well. So just this recognition that this relentless pursuit of pleasure actually makes us miserable. And it does it through a recognizable brain mechanism where we so overwhelm our brains with dopamine that our brains have to compensate by going into this dopamine deficit state, which feels exactly like clinical depression, clinical anxiety, such that the intervention for these kids, paradoxically, is not to make them more comfortable and not to insulate them more from stressors, but actually to get them out into the world and doing hard things, moving their bodies, engaging, in work, especially physical work, because of that disconnection between mind and body, which is so pervasive in the world that we live in now. With empathy, encouraging them to do things that make them uncomfortable. And ultimately, by doing that, allowing them to build up the mental calluses such that they can function in the world, and that they also recognize that, like, life is hard, and that it's not like, we're all happy all the time, and that unhappiness and frustration and pain and suffering is part of the human condition. So these are the kinds of sort of shifts that we need to make.
I mean, you bring up in the book, for example, in fact, one fellow used this technique of taking ice cold baths, which, it's a thing, and it's a good therapeutic thing. It's used in other ways therapeutically as well, medically. But in times past, we didn't have hot showers to go to. We didn't even bathing was painful throughout history, unless it was a very hot day somewhere. We didn't even have the luxury of hot water. So in fact, I love that story because he became addicted to ice baths, really. He couldn't wait to jump in the next one because that pain would, as you say, break that pattern, and allow him to go back into the release, into that joyful experience after the pain. And so let's talk about what happens with little kids who are being protected from essentially any kind of pain, any kind of danger. And you call this, I think, over-sanitization and over pathologizing our children, which I thought was really interesting. I hope you're enjoying this video because if you are, there are dozens more like it on my site, all supported by people like you. So if you'd like to keep this work rolling in and join our community, just click on the Patreon button at reginameredith.com. That also gives you access to insider commentary, my live book club, and other live events with special guests. So join in. Thanks. So please tell us what's happening as we're insulating our kids to this extent where they are not even allowed a moment of boredom.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I just want to say first, as a parent of Gen Z kids, I certainly can relate to an urge to want to protect and insulate my child from distress and from bad things. It makes me unhappy when my child's unhappy. It makes me anxious when my child is not doing well in something that he cares about or she cares about. But nonetheless, we have to really, allow our children to go out into the world and without our intervention or with minimal intervention, have these real world experiences, including real world consequences, or they really won't learn and they won't grow. And so in our attempts to be good parents, we're actually, depriving them again of that opportunity for growth that is so essential for mental and emotional well-being. And I think it's really going to require sort of a shift in our culture, in our notions of parenting. What's very predominant now in notions of parenting is this idea that, if my kid experiences any kind of trauma at all, they're going to be on some psychotherapist's couch in adulthood, having to work through their post-traumatic stress disorder. But in fact, that's a very modern concept. As recently as 150, 200 years ago, nobody thought about life stressors in that way.
Even when I was a kid, wasn't even considered.
Right. And again, you can take any of these things to the extreme. It's probably generally good that we don't, use physical
Yes.
punishment of our. It's maybe there's different schools of thought on this, but in general, either extreme is not good. But I do think that we've tipped over far too far in the direction of just wanting to protect our kids from any kind of, and people feel that the stakes are so high for our kids, to have a kind of academic and material success. And we're so anxious and frightened about our kids not sort of climbing this social ladder, which is, by the way, exacerbated by social media and TikTok and all the ways in which, kids now are not just comparing themselves to their siblings or their neighbors or their classmates. They're comparing themselves to the whole world, seeing these, influencers who seem to have it all. So it is a really, it's a hard world for these kids to grow up. And I have a lot of empathy for them and for their parents. Of which I'm a part, but somehow we've not gotten the equation quite right.
Well, no, not yet, because all this is relatively new. It's only the last couple decades that we've been faced with raising children with a device in their hands.
Right. That's true. Yeah.
Which is doing something too to their brain in terms of, the synaptic response and shortening of attention spans, to say nothing of all the rest of it.
Yeah.
So did you by chance see a documentary called Babies that came out maybe 10 or 15 years ago?
No.
And I bring it up because what was so fascinating about it is it was chronicling the lives from birth to the age of, I believe, 3 or 4 years old of 4 babies from different kinds of backgrounds around the world. One of them was in a village in Africa. One of them was from a tribe in Tibet. One was, I believe, New York City, and then San Francisco. And it was, at the end of it, what you came away with, the baby that was shining and capable and open and running with the herd was the baby in Africa. And it was interesting because what they had was a mother that was nearby. She was always there by the hut or by the tree. At least one mother was there. Right. Most of the mothers were there. So they knew they could touch with her. But the kids went out and ran on their own. They experienced all of their environment, and they, barefooted, et cetera, whatever dangers were out there. The kids ran as a herd together, and this little baby, by the time he could walk, was running with the other kids and learning his environment. He was healthy. He wasn't sick. His eyes were shining. He was curious. So let's talk about how we can even begin to allow our children. We're not in the savannah somewhere, how we can begin to give some of this back, and the notion of the beauty of boredom.
Yeah. Well, I didn't see that documentary. It does sound fascinating. I think, it speaks to, not just differences in parenting, but probably more importantly, how families are embedded within a society and how work and family interrelate. So, again, in the United States, up until about 200 years ago, family and work happened in the same place, and it was shared throughout the day and throughout the weeks and months and years. Today, we engage in a lot of separating from our children. We go to work, they go to school, and those separations alone, you could argue, are highly traumatic because we're highly social creatures.
Yes.
And every time we separate, there's some degree of separation anxiety. When we come back together, there's some degree of rapprochement or re-engagement anxiety. And so we have this, like, inherently this really stressful kind of condition. Now, interestingly, social media, there are a lot of family texts, and families now at a distance able to stay in closer proximity through the text, which can be a good thing. It can be a bad thing too, because of the kinds of stimulation we might get, or the lack of other data that we might get, if we're just texting without being able to, follow up in person to sort of check things out. But I just think it's important to really frame and recognize that it's not so easy as just saying, well, parents should do X, because parents are parenting in a world which is organized in a very different way than in, the way that life was organized 200 plus years ago, or the way that life was organized in other countries or other cultures. So just kind of noticing those things, I think, is really important. And then trying to think, okay, well, within the framework of how modern American life is, like, what can we do that would sort of foster? And I think what's happened, unfortunately, with the technology and social media and the devices is that families have become even more splintered. Like, instead of now there being family movie night, and I can speak from my own thing, we went from really enjoying family movie night when my kids were much younger to all of a sudden, when my kids were in high school, everybody had their own device. Nobody could agree on what they wanted to watch. So everybody watched something separately in separate rooms on their own devices. It's just a metaphor for the kind of splintering that we're seeing as more and more of us are getting our needs met from these devices, such that we no longer need to turn to other people in order to get those needs met. And of course, relationships are largely dependent on mutual needs, right? I need you, you need me. That's part of what keeps us together.
If you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel. And you might also want to consider joining Patreon, which allows me to keep all of this content free and available to everyone. And if you're looking for like-minded souls, you might also enjoy my online community called Our Neighborhood. Links to join are in the description.